my beautiful people. I go by the name Shota de Olusegun. In this particular video, I'm going to actually share with us something so profound. And as you can see on my screen, I have one of my research publications on the screen. So I want to briefly share with you the derived formula of everything that I'll be using in this video to unify quantum mechanics to classical mechanics. This is a serious problem in physics, and Einstein worked on this particular problem called theory of everything. But then I derived this formula called formula of everything to unify quantum mechanics to classical mechanics. Now, today's video is so powerful. It is an initiative of theory of everything with Curt, Jaimungal. So it is Ash Core 1. So now this video, I will have to go through my 2 research publications. Then I will explain the derivations and then go on to the application of formula of everything. Then we will get to dissect another derivation, which is time energy wave function. And after that, we're going to explore time wave model, time energy wave model. So those are the 3 powerful tools that we're going to actually dissect in this particular video. So one thing I want to say is that this video is going to be, is going to be the top-notch winner of this Ash Core 1 contest. The reason being that this is a special video that, talks about reality of the universe. It deals with the unification of quantum mechanics to classical mechanics, something that mainstream scientists all over the world had struggled to achieve. Well, I thank God it is by God's grace that I'm able to actually achieve this. It is not by my power, neither by my strength. It is by God's grace. And so I give glory to Almighty God. So now, with no further ado, I want us to dive deeply into today's particular topic. Now, you can see the title of my research publication is The Time Theory of the Universe. And you can see my name there, Shota de Olusegun. It was actually published, on the 10th of October 2021. And you can see the volume right there, which is volume 2. It was published on International Journal of Scientific and Engineering Research, you understand? So now, here is the abstract, but basically, I don't want to dwell much on that abstract. I just want to go straight to the derivation. So now, basically, you can see that here I have the derivation of formula of everything, and so I need to quickly go through this for us to really understand what this is all about. So now, Basically, I just have to start from, I want to start from, yes, I want to start from here. The formula of everything, the space of time interval is the necessitating factor for movement, rotation, gravitation, speed, action, growth, balance, hosting of moving entity, emanation of existence, vibration, wave, radiation, and so on. Then it is safe to say time is the movement of energy, electromagnetic force, strong nuclear force, and weak nuclear force. And energy is the movement of gravitation, which is the movement of mass concentrated matter, gravitational force. Mathematically, we can say T is the function of E, which is energy, where E is the function of gravitational force of matter, just as we have right here, E equal to Gm. So T is the function of gravitational force of matter. You can see what we have right there. So T is the function of E, which is the function of gravitational force of matter. So now I have three relationships right here. I want to actually track down the relationship between time, energy, and mass. And for me to achieve that, I will have to use chain rule of differential calculus. Now, one thing I realized about this derivation is, thank God I used differential calculus and then used chain rule of differential calculus to derive this. Later on, by the time we dissect the time energy wave model, then you will be able to see that you'll be able to see the reason it is difficult for one to actually, unify general relativity with quantum mechanics. You understand? Because there is a needed gap that one must actually have, to allow for what is known as spontaneous symmetry breaking, which would actually catapult us into a dimension to, you know, get that complex system that can give us the kind of unified identity that we need to have at quantum level, which we then be immediately sent back to the classical mass world as consciousness. So what we're going to actually unravel today is far more than what is being taught in, in academia. So I just want you to fasten your belt, sit back, relax, and enjoy what I have together for you in this particular video. So now, that being said, now let's move to the next paragraph. The mass of heavenly bodies implements gravitational force at mass level, but it is a worth of energy at either speed close to the speed of light or the speed of light. Therefore, we will use the speed of gravitation instead of weight of mass in E equals mc squared. So now what I'm trying to do here is just to use the differential calculus, use the chain rule of differential calculus, then integrate E equals mc squared with it. Now, I'm not going to use the entire of the relativistic mass shell solution. It comprises of momentum, then mass multiplied with the speed of light. You understand? I'm not going to use everything because the differential calculus will actually give me the the momentum configuration as it ought to be, instead of using the momentum in that solution, in that relativistic mass shell solution. So now, to arrive at the speed of the universe, and as well to quantize mass by speed of gravitation that is common to all heavenly bodies. Having the first paragraph situation, we need to use chain rule of differential calculus invented by Sir Isaac Newton to implement the moving algorithm of time in relativity to matter, because the speed of time is not fixed but relative. In that case, speed of time could be termed as electromagnetic speed of relativity. So now we can see that basically we now have a particular idea to follow up right. Yes, so now to use the chain rule, we have dt the m equal to dt the e times the e the m. You understand? So dt the m equal to dt the e multiplied with the e the m. That is the chain rule. So for t is a function of m, let t equal to e squared. For t is the function of E, which is energy, where E equal to m squared plus 1. Therefore, E equal to gm, which is gravitational force of matter. Thus, T equal to E squared, and E squared equal to, in parentheses, m squared plus 1. I close the parentheses to have it squared. Okay, so good. Now that we have that, then we have to take the derivative of the first term, dt the e, that will give us 2 times 1e raised to power 2 minus 1, that will be 2e. Then we take the second term, which is the e the m, that will be 2 times 1m squared minus 1, that will give us 2m. By the chain rule, we're going to have the t the m equal to the t the e multiplied with the e the m to be 2e multiplied with 2m. That will give us 4em. Okay, so now therefore the t the m equal to 4. Then don't forget we have this parameter right here, this particular parameter. So we're going to the parameter where we have where e equal to m squared plus 1. So we're going to substitute that right here to have it to be. So we're going to substitute that, and that will give us, we're going to, don't forget, say what we have right here. E equal to m squared plus 1. And so we're going to substitute that for E. So we have that in parentheses. So 4, the m equal to 4, in parentheses m squared plus 1. Then after the parentheses, we have m. By the time we simplify that, then we're going to have 4m squared plus 4m. Now, this 4m squared plus 4m stands as, placeholder for both strong nuclear force and weak nuclear force. Then you get to know more about that. So now we have the weak nuclear force to be 4m, while the strong nuclear force to be 4m squared. So definitely the weak nuclear value will be suspended to the strong nuclear value. Okay, so now to induct E equals mc squared as E in our 4em, of 4 parentheses m squared plus 1, then outside the parentheses m placeholder, let t equal to e squared. For t is the function of e, where e equal to m dot c squared. I close the square bracket, then I have everything squared. So m equal to, we don't want to use the value of mass right here, where we want to use, the speed, the gravitational speed of sun. That's what we're going to use, because, sun is at the center of the solar system. So we have the heavenly bodies revolving, all the heavenly bodies revolving around the sun. So the gravitational force of sun is what actually keeping all of them in place and making them to actually revolve around the sun. So we're going to use gravitational speed of sun, and that is the value that we have here, 274 I think meter per seconds or so. So we have it to be 274 right there. Then the speed of light, which is approximately 3.0 times 10 raised to power 8 meters per second. So now So now the speed of sun's gravitational force and the speed of light respectively, those are the things we're going to use. So we use the speed of sun's gravitation because its weight force makes other planets orbit around it, like I said before. Okay, so now the TDM equal to 4EM, which is equal to, you know, 4, then in parentheses we have m dot c squared. I close the square bracket to square everything plus 1, then outside the bracket I have the m right there. So now by having this, then we can put the value. So we have the TDM to be 4, we open the parentheses, square parentheses, then 274 in parentheses I have 3.00 times 10 raised to power 8, close the brackets, then I square that, close the square bracket, square that plus 1, then outside the bracket I have m. So now the TDM equal to 4, then I have 274, then when I have applied the square of the speed of light, then I have the value to be 9.0 times 10 raised to power 16. Then after the square bracket, I have it being squared plus 1. Then after that parenthesis, I have my m. So the TDM equal to 4. Then I open the parenthesis, by the time I multiply 274 with, the 9.0, the value that I have inside the parentheses, then I have that to be 6.3 times 10 raised to power 38. Then I close the square bracket plus 1. Outside the bracket, I have m. So now the TDM equal to, by the time I multiply the 4 with the, with the two terms in the parentheses, then I have the initial term to be 2.5 times 10 raised to power 39 plus 4, because 4 times 1 will be 4. Then outside the parentheses, I have m. So now the TDM equal to 2.5 times 10 raised to power 39 m plus 4m. That is the formula of everything for you. Now the 2.5 times 10 raised to power 39 m plus 4m, that is the total formula of everything. But then the 2.5 times 10 raised to power 39 is the constant speed of the universe. So I can replace that with capital U. Then I have the final formula of everything to be this, the TDM equal to capital UM plus 4M. That is the derivation of formula of everything, and this formula is so powerful. You see how we're going to apply this formula, and you'll be able to see its power. But then there is another derivation that I have to show you. So let me quickly get that and okay. So now you can see you can see the theories of everything right here. So I'm actually, in for that core 1 contest. So now let's see, where is my where is my okay, I need to let me quickly go back. So you can see I have core 1 right here. So now the second research publication is what I want to show you guys now. Okay, okay, so now let's do this. Now this is the second research publication, and as you can see, The title of this one is Seeing the Anatomy of Quantum Gravity Through Formula of Everything. So the author Shotade Olusegun. So I still remain the author. This was published on on 6th of June 2022. You understand? So the volume is volume 13. On that same peer-reviewed journal, which is International Journal of Scientific and Engineering Research, volume 13. So that is that. So here I have the abstract, but basically I want to quickly go down to derivation of the time energy wave function. But here you can quickly see how formula of everything can be applied. I apply formula of everything right here. You can see the suspension of weak conveying value, which is 344 to 2.200, couple of zeros at, I think, a couple of zeros up to the point where the value is suspended. But I will still, shed more light on that. I don't want to waste time on that. So, so, but basically, what I want you to know is that, when you expand, oh, do not let me go straight to the time energy wave model. Okay, so right now, here I have uh, derivation of uh, derivation of time energy wave model. Now you can see derivation of time energy wave function, rather. So you can see time energy wave function. Time energy wave model, I have it in form of time wave and energy wave. So the blue curvature is the time, is the energy. Is that the black? Okay, the black curvature is the time trajectory, while the blue curvature is the energy trajectory. And then you can see that when time is behind energy, we have momentum, but when time is ahead of energy, we have position. And so that is how it is. In the position phase, we can get to see instantiation of mass worth. In the momentum, we get to see energy density, or rather noise. You understand? So now let's see how the time energy wave function is derived. The reason I have to derive this time energy wave function was for the fact that when the formula of everything was applied, there is this issue, because now let's look at this. Let's just look at how it is applied. Let's briefly look at how it is applied here. For instance, let's say what you know is the 86 kilogram, and then you want to use that to get the quantum counterpart. If you put 86 kilogram in the place of the two m's in the formula of everything, the answer you will get will be 2.2 times 10 raised to power 41 plus 344, because 86 times 4 will give you 344. Then when you now solve this further, you realize that you have 2.20 times 10 raised to power 41. Then you might be wondering if the 344 did not even have effect on this. But then you realize that the value, the weak conveying value, is being suspended somewhere. So now if we'll expand this value, 2.20 times 10 raised to power 41, if we expand that in standard form, then we're going to see that we have couples of zeros that suspend the 344 at 38th position. At 38th position. So now the value will now be 2.2 times 10 raised to power 38. At 38th position, the value is being suspended. But then we need to manually annihilate the suspended zeros, only the suspended zeros, for us to cross the boundary. The essence of having it to be the way we have it is because we have this divergence between classical mechanics and quantum mechanics. And so the divergence has to be bridged by the annihilation of the suspended zeros. And by annihilating suspended zeros, there will be no any form of energy exertion on or whatsoever. And so it's going to serve as a free fall, which is, the classical gravity, or yes, which is the classical gravity phase. You understand? So it's going to serve as free fall. But then we realize that the free fall will actually be exhausted at the quantum suspension. There is quantum suspension. But then, because the gap is so vast, then the power is so enormous to cause what is known as spontaneous symmetry breaking. Spontaneous symmetry breaking we allow for accumulation of mass worth, but then we have that operation right inside the nucleus. So you will get to understand this as I will show you the time energy wave model to explain this better. Right inside the nucleus, we have the area to be, so curved. The area, we have it to be so curved to allow for angular momentum. But then the accumulation of the mass worth, I call it arbitrary mass worth because the value of electron, later on we're going to use electron to get its counterpart, then use the counterpart to reconfirm the electron, but we're not going to really reconfirm the electron because at quantum level we always have momentum, so we haven't been shifted into the black hole board. We know that when we relate that result back to the initial derivation, we're going to have the electron's value. You understand? So that is telling us that we can only traverse that vertical trajectory of time, which is the instant trajectory of time, one time. You understand? For us to genuinely get the location of the quantum particle. So because the moment relativity is involved, we need to actually apply that vertical trajectory on time relative to the classical to get the quantum location, the quantum mass worth location. So now we now say that we need to annihilate. How can we annihilate? So basically the manual annihilation, we have to do it, we have to do it by ourselves. But then don't forget that it's going to be spontaneous in form of free fall. So now to annihilate, we can just get this 344, take it over the 10 raised to power 38, and by the time we'll expand the fraction, we're going to have it to be 3.4 times 1 all over 10 raised to power 38. And then by the time we solve that further, that will give us 3.4 times 10 raised to power times 3.4 times 10 raised to power minus 38. So that is the quantum counterpart of 86 kilograms. That is how to get it. So now we can use quantum mass worth to get classical counterpart, use the classical counterpart to confirm the quantum mass worth. But then, like I said, I realized that the initial quantum mass worth, which is electron, that is if we use electron, that electron that we use to get the classical counterpart, if we should put that classical counterpart value in the formula of everything, we realize that we get a decayed value, which is by reduction of 1 at the power. So instead of having need to be 9.109 times 10 raised to power minus 31, we have it to be 9.109 times 10 raised to power minus 32. So now, in order for me to track what is actually happening, I have to derive time energy wave function to see what is actually happening. I realize that there is a kind of flipping mechanism, but that flipping mechanism is not, obtainable at the dimension, the 2D dimension or the substrate dimension. Let me rather put it like that. So I suspect that the flipping mechanism might just be at higher dimension, you understand? And for me to really get what is happening, I have to use the time energy wave model, to know if truly it is flipping mechanism. You understand? That is happening right there. So now that is why I have to do that. So now you see that what I have here is known as, the symbol here is del multiply with capital E vector, but basically I just modeled this to be electric field, and we can call it vector, but I just want to call it electric field. And what I'm trying to do right here is just for me to see, having electric field will permeate the whole universe, and I want to see how that can be modeled if expanded in the universe. And then I know that the kind of momentum I'm going to have, the kind of momentum I'm going to have will be minus dt dE. So I have the del multiplied with electric field equal to minus dt dE. So now the inverse trajectory of time will be related to that of the energy. And once we have that expansion, we know we have electric field. Okay, so now then the del multiplied with del in parentheses multiplied with electric field equal to, derivation of del multiplied with time over derivation of energy. So basically what I'm trying to track right here is for me to, to model the expansion of this model, the changes as I have in an electric field relatively to time energy inverse interaction. You understand? So by having that, then I can then have del multiply with del in parentheses multiply with electric field equal to, now I will have to use the constant speed of the universe. So don't forget that I want to expand this model based on the constant value that I have derived in formula of everything. And so I have it to be minus 1 all over capital U squared, then second derivation of time over second derivation of energy. Okay, so now the above section is time energy wave inverse interaction at second order derivative, where capital U squared is the constant speed of universe squared. The stretched entanglement is of capital U squared interval from strong conveying force energy to mass worth and mass worth to mass of particles. Okay, so to integrate vector structure in order to have the wave equation in 3 dimensions, we implement the following. Don't forget I said I'm suspecting that there is this, transition from substrate dimension to higher dimension. And so my substrate dimension is 2D. So basically, I want to transit to 3 dimension, and so I will have to implement a placeholder for 3D in order for me to achieve that. So I have the del multiplied with del in parentheses multiplied with capital T, which will serve as, the vector placeholder, equal to del multiplied with del multiplied with del in parentheses multiplied with capital T minus del squared T. So that is the model. So then now that I know that I have a placeholder for that, vector for me to actually achieve that 3D dimension. So now I can then have del multiplied with del in parentheses multiplied with electric field of vector minus del squared electric field equal to minus, then I can have my term, which is minus 1 all over capital U squared, then second derivation of time over second derivation of energy. So now that I have that, when you look at this, you see that it's more or less like I'm expanding the ambient structure of electric field. So I don't really have instantiation of mass worth as such. So the expansion of time inverse relationship with energy, is equal to that electric field as we have it. So once it is, because it is equal to that, then I can have del squared electric field minus, I can take the term to the right side just for me to equate everything to zero. Since it is the same thing, so 1 all over capital U squared, then second derivation of time over second derivation of energy. Then I equate that to zero. Once I have equated that to zero, then I can integrate the relativistic mass shell or the special, yes, or the relativistic particle value. Okay, so to solve for mass formation of particles as suspended in time relativistic scaling, we have, since the total for a relativistic particle with mass m according to special relativity is, E squared equal to p squared c squared plus m squared c squared. Since that is the value, you understand, so then I can just integrate that into my derivation for me to see what is happening. So we need to substitute capital U for C for time energy wave function propels at the constant speed of universe, not at the constant speed of light. So therefore I have it to be this. So now I have second derivation all over second derivation of total energy. So the capital E is total energy minus 1 all over capital U squared, then second derivation of time to second derivation of energy equal to, now I have this relativistic particle in form of mass, but then don't forget that by having total energy of that relativistic mass shell in squared, that means that it is actually going towards the singularity of the black hole. So I'm going to have decaying mechanism right inside the black hole, and the only way I can model the decaying I can model the decaying factor is for me to introduce Planck constant, because the mass worth of energy can be quantized, and once that is done like that, then I can have this discontinuity of energy to allow for that decay. So then I have minus 1 all over h squared, then p squared minus capital E squared, which is total energy over, capital U squared plus m squared capital U squared. Don't forget that I didn't use capital U4 because the C that I have right here is C raised to power 4. But then what I'm trying to actually model right here is for the fact that, we have this cone of light, you understand, and basically by the time you say the time energy wave model, we have this gravity to light cone as well, you understand. So I just want to get to the minimum level where I can actually maintain the suspension and see if truly I can still get singularity. If I want to see if at that level of minimal introduction to allow for suspension can still lead to singularity. So now I have it to be what I have here. Then by the time I solve that further, then I have it to be second derivation of total energy minus 1 all over capital U squared. Then I have second derivation of time all over second derivation of energy squared. equal to minus capital U squared multiplied with m squared then over h2, which is, the Planck constant. Now we can rearrange and easily generalize these to three dimensions by turning this equation into vector equation with wave and particle duality behavior of wave function. Okay, so that's what we want to do right now. So we're going to introduce the vector. You can see that we have our del squared, then we have the psi. We want to apply this with wave function and see what is actually happening. You understand? But then we now apply wave function to this. We put psi right there. We have our vector. We have r. We have parentheses. We have the r vector comma t, and then minus m squared capital U squared all over h squared. Then we apply psi to that, and then apply our vector to that. Then equal to 1 all over capital U squared. Then second derivation of time to second derivation of energy. We apply psi to that. We have the vector. But then when you look at this critically, there is something about what we have right here. Initially, we had the equation to be equal. We have, the right side of the equation to be equal with the left side. You understand? But then in this case, it is not so, because when you look at what we have right here, then it turns out that what we have at left side is not even equal to what we have at right side. So by the time we solve that further, we have it to be second derivation of wave. I want you to pay attention to what we have as the final solution. Second derivation of wave over second derivation of total energy minus m squared capital U squared over h squared. Then we apply psi to that. Now what we have here what we have at left side leads to an infinity. But that infinity that we have right at the left side is different from the infinity we have at the right side. So now we have equal to 1 all over capital U squared, then second derivation of time to second derivation of wave. Now you see there is something right at the left. We have second derivation of psi all over second derivation of total energy, but at the right side we have second derivation of time all over second derivation of psi. Now you can see flipping mechanism right there. The wave pattern is being flipped. So with this, I'm able to get the fact that indeed I have this flipping mechanism right at higher dimension, which is introduced into the substrate, because the solution that we have right here is the solution of the substrate dimension, which says that we have singularity to singularity, and that means that we have singularity of Big Bang to singularity of the black hole. But then we have this flipping mechanism. So that singularity of the Big Bang is different from the singularity of the black hole. In the singularity of the Big Bang, we have energy density. In the singularity of the black hole, we have mass density. So that is the difference. So now with this, we then know that yes, we have a reasonable derivation that we can actually use to unify quantum mechanics to classical mechanics. So right now I want to go back. Okay, so right now I'll be using some images right now, and I'll use those images to drag my points home. Okay, so now this is core one folder. Okay, so now basically let me give you idea of meant by saying what I meant by saying yes, what I meant by saying okay, so now let me quickly I want to let me use the entire image that I have right here, and with this I will quickly launch you, yes, I will quickly launch you into reality of this formula of everything. You understand? Because when you look at what we have here is what is known as this is what is known as time energy wave model. Just like I have in that research publication, the time trajectory is the blue curvature, the energy trajectory is the red curvature. Then you realize that the curvature itself has this equilateral triangle structure right inside of it. So that is not difficult to decipher, because when you look at formula of everything, we have the T, the M, the T to the M stands for curvature of time to energy. Then you can see that in this formula, I didn't use the E. I didn't use the E because for us to have the curvature of energy, we must have this instantiation of mass worth that we allow for that curvature. And so basically we have that in the nucleus. And what this formula of everything is telling us is that the instantiation of electron can only be feasible in the nucleus, but then it can't just be there permanently. It can just, instantly be instantiated and then and then be radiated. So the only spot or the only place where we can have the instantiation of electron to be a particle will be right inside the nucleus. The moment electron is in that cloudy formation, it is everywhere, so it is not being defined. And so basically the T, the M, gives the curvature of time to energy. And when you look at what we have right here, equal to capital UN plus 4M, that is a linear solution. It's a linear solution, and by having it to be linear solution, there is possibility for us to have this equilateral triangle as we have it. Now, when you apply that formula of everything, then you will see that you can use quantum mass worth to get the classical counterpart. You can use the classical counterpart to, get the subsequent quantum counterpart, because we always have momentum at quantum level relative to classical level. But then, when you apply using the quantum mass worth, we're going to have this this linear trajectory. And then by having the answer to be in form of 5 point, that is when you supply the classical mass worth of the classical counterpart of the quantum mass worth, the answer that we get will be 5.7 times 10 raised to power 48. That value, as we have it, when you'll expand that in standard form, then we are going to see that the base value of quantum mass worth, which is 9.109 for electron, the base value will actually be 9,109, which will be suspended at 32nd position. So now, having it to be at 32nd position, we can have that value, the trajectory, the linear trajectory, to be 5.7 times 10 raised to power 32. So now this big blue convergence is that where we have that weak conveying value. And like I said the other time, when we manually annihilate, we're going to have this vertical trajectory because we're going to only annihilate the suspended zeros, and then there will be no extraction of energy or whatsoever. It's going to be in form of free fall. And so we can have this vertical trajectory, which is the instant trajectory of time. Now, time has two identities based on the solution of this formula of everything, time by default is instant. When time is in relativistic scaling with energy, it becomes continuous. But then energy too has two identities. Energy by default is infinite. When energy is in relativistic scaling with time, then it becomes discrete. Please get this at the back of your mind. By having the vertical trajectory, then we know it's a free fall, which can actually, happen spontaneously. So the free fall will be right from this big blue convergence, which is the where we have the suspension of the weak conveying value. Now the real classical mass worth is where we have the second small blue convergence. You can see that is actually being suspended around the point of intersection of that vertical trajectory to the dashed horizontal trajectory. The dashed horizontal trajectory is the default trajectory of energy, which is infinite. So now, from the left point where we have this suspension, we have Big Bang singularity, which is from singularity towards this right side where we have the black singularity. So that models the solution we got in that time energy wave function. So singularity to singularity, Big Bang singularity to. So, but then we know that by applying the formula of everything using quantum electrons mass, we have 5.7 times 10 raised to power 48 to be the total, energy curvature in classical realm. So the classical realm is from this dashed horizontal trajectory to the time curvature. Then the quantum realm is from this dashed horizontal to energy curvature. So now you can now see that the action of time to have this diagonal linear trajectory must actually give us reaction in energy, the equal reaction in energy, second law of thermodynamics. So we have this trajectory, we must as well have inverse of it in energy trajectory. And so we have the inverse of that to be 5.7 times 10 raised to power minus 32. So now we now need to bridge, the divergence, because this linear diagonal trajectory in time represents the constancy of gravity, while this diagonal linear trajectory in energy represents the constancy of light. So now we have the divergence just as it has been experienced by many, researchers, that we usually have divergence like that. And then we know that the central trajectory is infinity. But then by annihilating the suspended zeros, we have this vertical trajectory. But then the vertical trajectory we then bridge the divergence. Now, the vertical trajectory is the instant trajectory of time, but it is not void of energy. That is why we could have the elongation, because energy would want to be everywhere, but time is instant. Time would want to converge energy to a point. But then, in this case, energy is elongating the trajectory of time, even though it is instant, so tiny. The trajectory is so tiny, and being vertical means that it is instant. So now, I can only call this solution a static and undulating field. So this is a field at event horizon, or a field at the present phase of time peregrination. So it is only ideal for us to have this static and undulating field, because when you look at the left equilateral triangle, it represents the cosmological expansion of the universe. And when we have a field that is actually propagating outwards, as what we have with, variations attached to the edge, which would lead to, the real expansion of the universe as we have it, because the curvature of time you know, is attached to that equilateral triangle. And so we have, influx of additional information that will further expand the cosmological space. You understand? So additional information will be translated as expansion. And so it is only ideal for us to have static and undulating field at event horizon where the propagation of that field can be totally quenched for us to have inverse of that propagation. But then we realize that the vertical trajectory is so strong, and then right where we have this big red convergence, the big red convergence is what I call quantum arbitrary suspension, while the blue big convergence is classical arbitrary suspension. The reason I call them suspensions is for the fact that they are mass convergence that are relativistically connected to the real. In the case of the classical realm, the instantiation of that arbitrary classical suspension is needed for us to really have the instantiation of classical mass. But then we then get to see that the classical mass is being relativistically connected to that arbitrary mass world for that classical mass to be instantiated. Don't forget that in the space, you can't just have a point that is not relativistically connected to another point. If you just have a point, that point can never be identified, let alone for it to be labeled, because there is nothing you can relate it with. So relativity is essential for us to really have instantiation of anything in this in space. You understand? So now when we have initial point, we must instantly have another point that is inversely related to it. And that is why you could see that the movement of light in time, the speed movement of light, when measured in time, must be multiple of it. And that is why we have c squared. When you try to measure light, you can't just measure it without having multiple of it, because before light can even be instantiated as an entity, you must have multiple of it, and that other part of it must be inversely related to it. So that is why we have this two-way measurement of light. We can't, have the ideal one-way measurement for light, because, the time that is far apart the clock that is far apart to another clock, we actually measure different time, and you can't, you can't effectively or adequately measure light in that kind of settings. So it is more ideal just for you to have one clock. Then when you project the beam to a mirror that will reflect it back to the detector, then the detector will actually be where the clock is, and then you can actually measure the two-way measurement of light, and that whatever you measure will be average of the light speed. And we know that we be squared, because we know any measurement of light in time will be not even only light, any object that is to be measured in time must have multiple of its speed in time. Okay, so now that being said, with that we now get the picture that it is ideal for us to have that static and undulating field that is newly being discovered by formula of everything, for us to even have the inverse of this initial equilateral triangle. And we now realize that the trajectory of that vertical trajectory is even beyond the limit of the equilateral expansion. So it travels through the quantum nucleus, because you can see immediately after the big red convergence, I have compacted equilateral triangle. If you zoom in on that vertical trajectory of time, you are going to have the stacking of the equilateral triangle of the past and that of the future vertically. So what is known as now, or the event horizon, is the vertical combination of the past equilateral triangle and the future equilateral triangle. And when you have it like that, for it to actually form a perfect circle, then you must have it being suspended such that you have compacted equilateral triangle all around the edges. And by having compacted the equilateral triangle, that means that the compacted equilateral triangles are at curved area. It will allow for angular momentum. Then we're going to have constantly accelerated momentum. The constantly accelerated momentum that we have can be translated to a kind of motion that one would have on treadmill. When you're moving on treadmill, your motion or your movement can never be translated as your motion on that treadmill can never be translated as moving from one point to another. So that is the kind of movement we have in that compacted equilateral triangle that we allow for standing wave. And it is that standing wave that we project us into the higher dimension for us to connect to the electron of the higher dimension, which will instantly be converted to positron, and that will be flipped back into the substrate dimension. So now the transition from the substrate dimension to higher dimension through standing wave is what I call complex system. And at the same time, we can call it quantum entanglement. Now, quantum entanglement is not a phenomenon. It's not a phenomenon within a substrate dimension. It's a transiting. It's a transiting projection right from substrate dimension to higher dimension, and that is complex system for us. So now that you understand that, by having that flipping mechanism at higher dimension, when you have complex system already, you are going to have toggling of imaginary number with real number. That is flipping mechanism for you. So now, the moment we have that will energize momentum, because you can see that we have the most expanded region, and so we have low energy state. So that will energize momentum to allow momentum towards the core singularity of the black hole. Okay, so now that we have that, then we have the equilateral triangle of the left side being flipped as what we have at the right side. And so that is it. We have the past to be from the edge, then we have the future to be from the base of the equilateral to the edge towards the right. Okay, so now, so now we know that by having it to be flipped as such, then it means that, don't forget that in this expanding cosmological space of the universe, the operation, the equilateral triangle is not really symmetric as we project it to be. It is not really symmetric. It is symmetric. I don't know, maybe I should say it is symmetric by momentum, but by operation, it is not symmetric. If you dissect what we have at quantum level, you can see that we do not have an instantiation of mass worth right inside the equilateral triangle, the big equilateral triangle. So the instantiation of the quantum mass worth of this substrate dimension will be initiated right inside the compacted equilateral triangle, which is outside the big equilateral triangle. And that tells us that the quantum trajectory is actually decaying mass worth. And that would serve as a momentum support for the classical classical mechanics at classical level to allow for mass convergence. So at one side of equilateral, we have contraction, while we have expansion at the other side. And so expansion in time is smooth, and that allows for mass convergence. And so definitely we have discrete at one side, discrete nature of energy at one side. We have continuous nature of time at the other side of equilateral triangle. So I will actually dissect this further for you to understand what it's all about. So now that we have that, we then know that the equilateral triangle, we know that the symmetric nature of equilateral triangle is not thoroughly symmetric as such. So we have this embedded asymmetric nature right inside the equilateral triangle, and so we will dissect that further. But then you can see the whole system. With this, I think you understand the concept. So now, and I want to go back to use what I have here to explain reality of the universe. Don't forget that in this video, I'm going to touch down on AI, touch down on consciousness, and then touch down on reality of the universe. So let me quickly touch down on what consciousness is. Let me introduce you to what consciousness is. By having this vertical trajectory, which is instant, it's actually telling us that we can only get, the genuine location of particle only when we travel at the instant speed of time. But then, but then we now realize that we have a kind of scenario that can actually, represent that. For instance, let's say we have an external observer observing an object that is approaching a black hole, and let's say that object reaches the event horizon. Then to that external observer, it will seem as if the object is static. So the external observer cannot see beyond the event horizon, but then the object itself will not experience any stoppage, let alone to experience any delay. So the object will glide smoothly into the black hole. Now, which of these two scenarios is real or correct? So, is it the scenario of the external observer that observes static momentum, or the scenario of the object that is not even experiencing any stoppage, let alone to experience any delay? But I must tell you that the reality of the universe is telling us that there is a point in the universe where we have the coexisting of of that static nature that is being observed by external observer, and um, that continuous momentum that is being experienced by the object into the black hole. There must be a point where we have the two together. So invariably what I'm saying is that the localized nature of classical mechanics must cohort with the global nature of the quantum mechanics, and that is the reality. So now we have that in this static and undulating field. Okay, so now the reality is pointing to the fact that we must have, the two cohorting together. So how can we have the two cohorting together? Yes, we can have the two cohorting together right inside the static and undulating field. Because, when formula of everything discovered this static and undulating field, when something is said to be static, it shouldn't be elongated in any form, and yet we have it been elongated to bridge the divergence between classical mechanics and quantum mechanics. And because of that, I have I have to just name it static and undulating field, and it is that field where we can have this coexisting of um coexisting of localized nature of classical mechanics with the globalized nature of quantum mechanics. Okay, so now we now know what the reality is talking about, but we will actually dissect that further as we progress. And so now, consciousness, what is consciousness? By this formula, by applying the formula of everything, I got to know that there are two phases to consciousness. The first phase is objective conscious experience, while the second phase is subjective conscious experience. Okay, so now let's dissect this. We know that the only way by which we can get to know the exact location of quantum particle relative to classical mass worth is by traveling at the instant speed of time. Then we know that, for instance, you have let's say there is somebody on earth. Being on earth, you might think the earth is flat, but then if you travel away from the earth to a certain point, then you can see the full picture of the earth, and then you can conclude that the earth is spherical. Okay, by being where you are to the earth, you are being suspended to earth, and anytime one is suspended to something, it simply means that one is infinite. We're going to dissect what this is all about, because classical mechanics is as incomplete as quantum mechanics. Mainstream scientists are saying that quantum mechanics is incomplete. The paper that Einstein, Podolsky, and Rosen, the paper they published, they were saying that quantum mechanics is incomplete, but classical mechanics as well is incomplete. But incompleteness of classical mechanics is not based on the awareness of the mass worth of classical mechanics. We already have the mass worth, you understand, but there is something. The mass worth is nothing without the virtue of consciousness. When one is unconscious, the person would not be able to even feel the weight of his mass. So mass is useless without consciousness. So the virtue of consciousness happens as if it is not imagined, because the classical mechanics is actually very close to reality. You understand? So the quantum effect of consciousness is so tiny to have effect at classical level. So it will just happen as if it is fundamental. You understand? So we need to know that by having that connection to higher dimension, we get connected to the electron of the higher dimension, and that will be instantly converted to positron, because the undefined electron in the substrate dimension is an electron, so the inverse of it must be at higher dimension, and that is why the electron of the higher dimension will be instantly converted to positron, and that will allow for the instantiation of that substrate dimension's electron. Now, the moment that we have that, we are able to have that because we have standing wave, and then the electron and the positron, they are the same thing. The difference is just the movement because they travel inversely to each other. That is the difference. But in terms of mass, in terms of charge, in terms of any other thing, they are the same. And the moment we get that, that information of the instantiation will be instantly transmitted at quantum level, and that is what we call quantum entanglement. Now, the feedback of that will be transmitted to the mass, to the classical mass worth, and that's what is known as objective conscious experience, and that is the objective phase of consciousness. Now, you two can think about it. We often talk about subjective conscious experience because for consciousness to be personal, it has to be subjective. But then that subjective conscious experience cannot work on its own without having the influx of objective conscious worth. Because the objective conscious worth is what the subjective conscious experience we have to work on. And I will quickly explain how it works right here. So now the thing is this: the objective conscious experience is so tiny. If you want to know more about this, in the shotadiology, because I have a field, it's a newly proposed field based on this formula of everything. This new field, I call it shotadiology. It is the study of artistic and scientific flipping mechanism of the universe for balanced solution. That is it. Now, the flipping mechanism is what I call the signature of Almighty God. And that is why we could see the flipping mechanism everywhere. In the DNA, we have it, in the trajectory of light. We have light being flipped. And that is why, in the projector, you see that the object you have in the projector is actually flipped upside down. So we have to, flip it up. We have to flip it upright before we could project it on the screen. So anytime you have the light, and that is why when you observe a real object right from outside, having the light to reflect on your eyes, there is inverse of that object right inside your eyes that will be flipped, upside down. You must actually have the inverse of that object before that object can become a reality that you can deal with. So basically, we always have this flipping mechanism everywhere, and that is why we could have electron and have positron. So positron is the inverse version of electron. That is why we could have classical mechanics and quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics, based on this, you can see that quantum mechanics is an inverse of classical mechanics. So now, the light cone will be the diagonal trajectories that we have at quantum level. And so when you relate that with the diagonal trajectories of the higher dimension, that is synonymous to the rack negative C. You understand? The rack was able to get this higher dimension to substrate dimension, but there was nothing like connection to, there was nothing like connection as we have it by applying formula of everything. So the rack just solved it by saying that there is possibility, there is this Pauli exclusion principle which must be observed by electrons. So the electron of the substrate dimension cannot actually jump into the into that the rack negative C. You understand? So we must, have a kind of radiation that we allow the electron to act as positron, so that we can have that connectivity. But that, the rack, used his own intellect to solve it verbally like that. But here in formula of everything, we have the transition by applying the formula of everything. You understand? So we have the unification like that. You understand? So now the rack was able to get the positron because of its solution, we could get the spin of positron and then the spins of electron. So now, what I'm now saying is that by having, I'm talking about consciousness now, by having that instant, okay, now shotadiology, I was talking about shotadiology. That shotadiology, I have shotadiology lecture series. You can actually go to my YouTube channel at shotadiology altogether. You will see there is a particular shotadiology lecture titled Dimensionology of Information. If you study that video, you will get to see how we get information, how to the object, how we get this relativistic information right from higher dimension, and how it is observed at substrate dimension relative to higher dimension. And then there is another one titled Dimensionology of Generalized Intelligence. So what we have at quantum level, that transition will actually allow for unified identity, just as we have in the solution of the 2025 physics Nobel laureates, the solution of this unified identity, the quantum tunneling, you understand. So by having that transition, we're going to have unified identity uh, of particles. So basically, we have that substrate dimension, which is 2D, to have inverse of itself. And the moment we now have relativistic scaling or relativistic connection between the two, that will give us the 3D. So now the 2D has become 3D. So the best way I can explain this is to say, if you have a plain sheet of paper on the ground, that is the lowest energy state it can be. Being right on the ground, the 2D paper is unfulfilled, in the sense that if you have an ant on that 2D paper, the ant will not be able to explore the other side of the paper. The ant will just explore the exposed side of the paper, because the ant will not be able to cross to the other side. Any attempt to do so, the ant will actually fall on the ground. You understand? But then if you lift that paper up, you can see that the ant can actually, cross the boundary to explore the other side. But is there any way you can configure the 2D paper to form a 3D object? Now, the paper, the 2D paper, if you actually turn it across such that you have the two extreme ends to face each other, and then give each of the two ends half twist and glue them together, it will form what is known as Mobius strip. By having Mobius strip rather, you see that the boundary has been taken away. Then we're able to have this unified 3D object. And with that, the ant can actually cross to explore both sides without crossing any border. That is the kind of what we have right there. So the dimension, we have this unified identity of 2D to be 3D, but that we have it because we have the inverse version of the 2D that are connected to form the 3D. Okay. So now you can see that the instant trajectory of time will not allow us to have huge share of the objective conscious influx. We just have tiny influx of objective conscious value, which is introducing to the substrate dimension. And that is not enough to give us reality. And don't forget that at that low energy state, the influx of the objective conscious value we allow, the influx of positron we allow to have energy to be energized at that phase, and so we can have momentum towards the black core singularity of black hole. Now, by moving towards the core singularity of black hole, that momentum will actually relocate this classical mass world to the exact point of intersection of vertical trajectory to horizontal trajectory right here. And that is where the classical mass world should be for real. And by the moment the classical mass world will be at that point, then the trajectory will have reached the core singularity of the black hole. But then when you apply the formula of everything, when you reiterate, because formula of everything, I must tell you at this point that it's a kind of formula that feeds back on itself. You can actually use an input to generate an output, then use the generated output as input to generate further output. So when you reiterate the application of formula of everything in this manner, you will get to a point where the base value of electron will be so decayed to 1.1, but then the power will be intact. Now, there is this interplay between the power of electron to the base value. So now you can see that the decay that we have at the power of electron will actually be smooth, because power, when you have anything to do with power, we have to deal with curvature. It will be smooth. So basically, in this expanding cosmological space, we have discrete nature of energy at quantum level, causing discontinuity of momentum for it to support continuous momentum at classical level for mass convergence. But what we have in the black hole is totally different. At the quantum level, we have smooth contraction to allow for discrete discontinuity of mass worth at classical level for us to, have the contraction both at quantum level and at classical level towards the core singularity of the black hole. So now another thing you need to know is that in this expanding cosmological space, we have an effect phenomenon. So the cause is actually preceding the effect in this expanding cosmological space. You understand? So we could have cause effect phenomenon. But in the singularity, in the black hole, that is why they could sense spaghettification. What we have there is not as what we have in the expanding cosmological space. In the expanding cosmological space, the momentum of time is ahead of energy, and that would allow for mass convergence, and so the decaying of mass value at quantum level will support that. But in the black hole, we have energy don't forget, energy is being energized at quantum level, so the energy is ahead of time. And because energy is ahead of time, then we have effect preceding cause. You understand? That is what we have. So now, by the time we now have the classical mass words to be at the point of intersection of vertical trajectory to horizontal trajectory, which is the ideal place where this classical mass world should be in first instance, and then we have the base value of electron being suspended to give us that infinite condition in the black hole. And then the electron, I must say this, electron that is being suspended, we have it being swing back and forth. So the signal is synonymous to that of the quasar. So the power will swing forward, swing back, and then the base will swing back and forth. So we have it to be in that form. You understand? Don't forget that by the time you use the mass worth of electron in the formula of everything, you get its counterpart, which will be 2,277,250,000 kilograms. when you put that value in the formula again to reconfirm the quantum mass worth of electron, you are not going to get the quantum mass worth electron because the momentum is continuous. But then it is synonymous to this nuclear fission. In the nuclear fission, when you try to bombard uranium, the nucleus of uranium with neutron, it will initially, almost instantly be big the moment you bombard it with that neutron. Then it will then split. It will split because it is so unstable to allow for that new big worth. But then the what, we have it initially, and that is the same way that is happening right there. Because in the black hole we have the nuclear fission, but in the cosmological expanding space we have nuclear fusion. So nuclear fission is when you have the tritium, deuterium merging together to form bigger element, which is helium. But then the fusion will actually split into two, krypton and barium. So now you can see that what we have is synonymous. So the original electron mass, what will initially be instantiated, but being within time, which is so tiny, then it will be reduced to the value that we have, which is, it will be reduced from 9.109 times 10 raised to minus 31 kilogram to 9.109 times 10 raised to minus 32. Now, that value is a decayed value. But then the moment it moves into the core singularity of the black hole, and then we have that suspension to give us that infinite momentum. So now the thing is, when you apply formula of everything, the moment it reaches that point of suspension, then you will see that subsequent reiteration of the application of formula of everything will resort to loops. Okay, so now, then by the time we have this classical mass worth where it ought to be relative to the suspended electron, then we have what is known as subjective conscious experience. So now, the essence of objective conscious experience is for us to get the quantum mass worth to get the exact location of quantum mass worth at complex level, which is at higher dimension relative to the classical mass worth. But then we see that at that complex level we have genuine contact, but then at classical level we have suspension. So that, when you look at it, that is why it is so difficult for us to have global now. Einstein said there is no way we can have global now based on relativity of simultaneity. That is what we have observed here. For us to really have this global now, we must have genuine contact at both sides, but that is not what we'll experience by applying formula of everything. So then, the global now is being resolved by instant transmission of information. So now, by the time the information is instantly transmitted, then we're going to have genuine contact at both sides, because the transmission of that information will have genuine contact with the classical mass worth as it will be transmitted from the point of instantiation of quantum mass worth at higher dimension. So now when we look at it, we can see that instant transmission of information is the ideal solution for us to have the global now. Because when you look at it, that for information to be transmitted at all, there must be two instantiated points localized in space. And then, for information to be transmitted at all from one point to another, we must have localized points in space. And then, by the virtue of that transmission, then we can say we have the transmission to be global if that transmission can genuinely, have contact at both sides. And then we know it is true. And so with that, through instant transmission of information, then we have the cohorting of the localized nature of classical mass words to global nature of quantum mechanics. And then if the signal that we have is such that is instant, as if the space between the localized point isn't in existence, then we know that indeed we have instant transmission of information. So basically that is how that can be analyzed for us to know that indeed we have the solution through that. So now that we have that, then we can then go further. So I can further use this to explain for us to get more idea about the reality of the universe. So overview insights of reality, where I have explained this before. A man on earth, by being in contact with earth, which is experience, will observe the earth to be flat. But by moving away from the earth to a certain distance, which is observation, if we then observe the earth to be spherical, if it should go further in space such that earth becomes a tiny dot relative to its position in space, given that the earth moves away at equal speed to that of the man, only then is the tiny dot of earth is quantum relative to the position of that man as classical. Please pay attention to what I'm saying. However, if the man should travel further in space such that the tiny earth is out of his sight, given that the lost earth can be located by the man at the instant speed, only then is such transition from the known realm to the unknown realm is complex. So now, once we have this situation, we know that that situation is telling us, is suggesting that we must have, the localized nature of classical mechanics cohorting with the global nature of quantum mechanics. Now, axiomatic condition for reality. Observation and experience are the two means by which one can obtain reality. It turns out that either of the two cannot ascertain reality when relativity is involved. On the other hand, there is no emergent reality without relativity. Can you see that? Now, when you have relativity in place, for instance, when you are at a certain interval to Earth and you observe Earth to get its reality, anytime you approach Earth, Earth as well will be approaching you at equal speed. And then you will then have to meet the Earth, not at its exact location. That is the problem. But then, if you travel so away in space that the Earth is out of sight, the only way you can get to meet that Earth at its exact location is for you to travel at the speed of time instantly to where the Earth is. That is only way you can meet Earth at its exact location. That is what this is saying. So now, observation is delusional of reality. Pay attention, pay rapt attention to this. Observation is delusional of reality relative to the experience based on localization. Can you see that? Meanwhile, when you are observing, like in the case of that external observer observing the object approaching the event horizon, the observer, based on the fact that the observer was localized where where it was, by the virtue of that localization, the observer could not see beyond the static limit, beyond the point of observing the object to be static. You understand? Meanwhile, experience is delusional of reality relative to observation based on globalization. You can see that. You see that when you say you experience something, it means that you have genuine contact. You can see the flipping mechanism in what I have right here. This is what is actually pointing to reality. And since we have this, now don't forget that I said it that no point in space can be instantiated without having its version that is inversely related to it. So you can't have reality, you can't even have anything in place in the universe without having relativity. You understand? So that is why we must actually reach that point where localization and globalization can actually coexist. Now, potential solution of reality. By the condition, localization and globalization must cohort. I have to put 0 here. Cohort. Experience and observation must be unified via static and undulating field. That is the solution. But then let's look at the testing experiment. Testing experiment is because we have to, dissect what infinity is. You understand? So, okay. All right. So now we have to dissect what infinity is all about. Now you can see the reason. I need to quickly let you understand what the reason why information is the ideal solution. You understand? When you look at what Cantor did with infinity, Cantor, he started pairing up. Basically, when you start to pair up a proper subset of, for instance, let's say we have natural numbers. If you have a proper subset of even number out of natural numbers, it's a proper subset. It shouldn't be at par. Like when you start pairing them together, that subset, proper subset, should be lesser to the natural numbers because it's a proper subset of the natural numbers. But then you see that when you start pairing them together, you can see that the even number can actually match up with the entire natural numbers that you have. And that is telling you that infinity is somehow instantiated as an entity that we can actually work with. And so now let's see why it is so. Don't forget that when I derived time energy wave function, the solution we got when that relativistic mass what is introduced was that we have infinities that are not the same. But then how can we get to know the infinity to know the infinity properly? So we know that by pairing up, now anything that has to do with pairing has to do with information, because you are pairing information. When it comes to pairing, you are actually working at the level of information. There is no doubt about that. So now, how can we get to know that something is infinite? Let's say if somebody tells you that he has actually gotten the biggest natural number, you can just tell the person to add 1 to that biggest number, and then the counting will continue. With that, you can say you have infinity. So what kind of formula you can have to have that? The kind of formula will be 2n plus 1. The 2n plus 1, just what we have right here, you can see 2n plus 1. When you look at that formula, is odd number, because when the n is 1, 2 times 1 will give you 2. When you add 1 to it, will give you 3. So when the n is 2, 2 times 2 will give you 4. When you add 1 to that, will give you 5. You can continue like that, and then you see that the set of number that you generate will be odd numbers. But then don't forget that this kind of odd number starts from 3. So then we can say we have infinite notation. Now, how can we have finite notation? How can we have finite notation? But then it is so weird to get to realize that what you can even call a finite is the same thing as infinite. What do I mean? Now, when you have a proper subset of something, you can say you have finite, because you have something that is ahead of that, and that can cause it to be instantiated as finite entity. But then the kind of formula you can have for that will be 2n minus 1. So when the n is 1, 1 times 2 will give you 2. When you subtract 1 from it, you have it to be 1. Then when the n is 2, 2 times 2 will give you 4. When you subtract 1 from it, will give you 3. Then when the n is 3, 2 times 3 will give you 6. 2 times 3 will give you 6. When you subtract 1 from it, will give you 5. Then you realize that the set of numbers that you will generate will still be odd number. So now the odd number that you have here, because it is odd number, we can call it to be infinite entity. The definition of the set of number is odd number, even though it's a proper subset based on the formula. So that proper subset, we let it be a finite instantiation of infinity. And so because it's an odd number, we can say it's an infinity, but then that infinity starts from 1. And that's what makes it to be different from the other infinity. And so we can say, and that is why I can confidently say that in the Big Bang singularity, we have energy density, while in black hole singularity, we have mass density. They are two different things. Energy density can easily be converted to raw energy. Mass density cannot be quickly converted to raw energy. So then the worth of mass density is more than that of the energy density. So with that, we can get to see that it is ideal for us to have that difference in the singularity convergence for us to continuously have momentum that will give us that phenomenon of infinity, because the horizontal trajectory, that is connected to both singularity of the Big Bang and black hole, that is the default infinite trajectory of energy. So you can get to see that. So now, I said that I call the flipping mechanism the signature of Almighty God. The reason is because we have that flipping mechanism everywhere. And when you look at it, for it to have taken place in higher dimension, it's something else. It's something else. And I will quickly give you an example of what I mean. So basically, let me quickly finish on this before I talk about that. So now we have two infinities. Of course, we can call this finite notation of, by being odd number, it is infinity. And then this is infinite notation, which is infinity. And with that, we can say we have different types of infinity. Now, there must be a transition point. And so we know that 2n, which is even number, will give us that, because even number will be thoroughly exhausted to reduce to nothing. So the genuine contacts that we have can be likened to even phenomenon, while the suspension can be likened to odd phenomenon. So you always have one being added to even formula. You understand? And that is the plus one that you have is that suspending worth. So you will always have it to be suspended. So basically, with this, we can get to know, because when you start pairing so proper subset of, for instance, natural numbers, you get it being matched up with the natural number. And as a result of that, look at what we have right here. When you, as you have these numbers to n, when you start matching up the even numbers with it, we shouldn't actually match up with the natural number, yet we have it to be matched up with natural number. And that gives, it gives that evidence and proof of completeness. So by having it to be like that, then we know that infinity is an instantiated entity that we can actually work with. So that is that. So you can see that right there. And so with that, we now know what infinity is all about and how that virtual of information can actually allow us to effectively work with infinity. And that is why the instant transmission of information is the ideal solution for global now. Okay, so that being said, then I want to quickly show us, I want to drill deeply into the equilateral triangle to let us see what I mean by having constant at one side and, having having genuine contact at one side, then having, now, when you have this pile of summation in this format, when you have the pile of summation in this format, then you can easily figure out the inherent nature of equilateral triangle for you to know that every equilateral triangle has within itself, the virtue of asymmetric nature. So now, you have one at topmost, then beneath that you have 1 plus 2, beneath that you have 1 plus 2, 3, beneath that you have 1 plus 2, 3, 4. If you do that continuously down to 0 baseline, so if you count, you see that at this right side, where I have contracting phase by variations, because we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 to 0 right there, I call it variation. That is, the totality of that is 10. And if you count the repeated ones that we have at left side, if you count that, that will still give you 10. If you now count the base variation from 1, you will reach 0. That as well gives 10. With that, we can confirm that what we are working with is equilateral triangle. But then, you can see that at the right side, in red pen, I wrote contracting phase by variations. How can you get to see that indeed this side is actually contracting and this particular side is actually expanding? So now what we really have, this is actually synonymous to what we have in the black hole. In the black hole, the quantum part is contracting continuously. It is not being discrete because we have inverse of what we have in the cosmological expanding space, you understand? So now these variations, the way you can get to know that it's actually contracting towards the 0 is when you dissect this equilateral triangle diagonally. So diagonally, if you count this 1, you have it to be 10. Now count diagonally the whole 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You have the 2 to be in 9 places. When you count the 3, you have it to be in 8 places. When you count the 4, you have it to be in 7 places. You count the 5, you have it in 6 places. You count the 6, you have it in 5 places. You count the 7, you have it in 4 places. You count the 8 diagonally, you have it in 3 places. You count the 9, you have it in two places down to 0. Diagonally, you can get to see how it contracts towards the 0. So it means that when you have expansion at one side, you must have contraction at the other side. So can that be same for the baseline? The baseline, we have variations, but then you can see that the variation is actually expanding. So if you count it upward up to where we have the topmost one, you can see that it starts shrinking towards that. So the here we have inverse of the initial diagonal contraction, which means that the variation is actually expanding while the constancy is actually contracting, unlike what I said before. So now, when you look at that, but there is something so shocking, something so shocking. But now the thing is this: now we have one singularity. Don't forget that 0 is a transiting point to higher dimension, so it's a portal. So if we flip this equilateral triangle to have another one beneath it like this, then if it is flipped properly, we're going to have its 0 to be stacked above this 1, and so we can have from singularity to singularity. So only when we have equilateral triangle being flipped vertically that we can have the horizontal singularity to singularity, and that tells you, the solution we have in the substrate dimension already. Okay, so now that being said, we now know that yes, of course, we have the inherent asymmetric nature even in equilateral triangle, which is symmetric. Okay, but then the most shocking thing here is that we have this toggling of even number to odd number. We have toggling effect of even numbers to odd numbers. Let's see that. This one, look at the right side, the extreme right side. The 1 is 1. 1 plus 2, you have it to be 3. 1 plus 2 plus 3, that is 6. 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, that is 10. So if you do that up to the baseline, then you realize that the set of numbers that you have multiple of odd numbers, multiple of even numbers, and you have multiple of odd numbers, multiple of even numbers. That shows the toggling of odd numbers to even numbers, and that is the kind of phenomenon that we have at complex level. But it is not the toggling effect of even number to odd numbers. We have it as imaginary number to real number. So now, we don't forget we have 2, 2, 1, 3, they are odd numbers. 6, 10, they are even number. 15, 21, odd numbers. 26, 36, 28, 36, even number. 45. So now this 0, you still get 45. So I tag that to be a flipped version of the initial 45. So odd number. Now you can see that from odd number, which is suspension, we have it down to another odd number at the center, which is suspension. Don't forget, horizontally you have suspension to give you infinity to infinity. So now we now have, why do we have odd number in 2, even number in 2? You must always have 2, 2, 2 for you to have instantiation of any entity in space. So now you can see that it's a genuine solution for us, and with this we know that shortadiology novel or the newly proposed field should be adopted in academia to serve as field of reality. So we have field of reality, which is shortadiology. I have lecture series on shortadiology. Yes, on shortadiology rather. anyone who is interested can actually go through the series to understand this concept quite all right. So that is that. And so now I want to, but before I explore further, I just want you to see the publication certificate that I have. Certificate of publication. When I published my 2 research publications on peer-reviewed journal, I have certificate for it. Now you can see Shotade Olusegun has successfully published research paper, Seeing the Anatomy of Quantum Gravity Through Formula of Everything. Can you see that? So this was June 2022. You can see the website. You can see members, IJSE review board panel. So this is the certificate. And so this is, see what I have. International Journal of Scientific and Engineering Research, IJSER publication certificate. Now this, you can see this is the paper number. Paper title is the Seeing the Anatomy of Quantum Gravity Through Formula of Everything. That is the second publication, you understand? So authors, Shotade Olusegun. Type of the paper, research, evaluation. Now, significance of contribution. It's a novel research publication, so I have the significance of its contribution to be 3, originality of content to be 4, technical quality to be 4, clarity of presentation to be 4. Then overall recommendation, accept in current state as research paper. So can you see that? So then you can see paper published, you can see additional information, you can see the stamp, you can see everything. Okay, that is it. And so I have the second certificate of publication. Shotade Olusegun has successfully published research paper, The Time Theory of the Universe. You can see that. You can see that. You can see this one, 2021 October. You can see that. Okay, so now let's finally see the, evaluation of that as well. So, International Journal of Scientific and Engineering Research, IJSER, so publication certificate, paper number, you can see the number, then paper title, The Time Theory of the Universe, authors, Shotade Olusegun, type, research, significance 3, originality 4. You can see, that's that. So now with this, I believe, so basically, let me just quickly just expand this, and so that now this is, okay, now this is just the derivation of the formula of everything, but you can actually see the time energy wave model quite all right here, and that is why I just want to quickly use this. Now, for instance, let's say right at the bottom we have quantum mass, which is 9.109 times 10 raised to power minus 31. So if we supply that in the formula of everything, we get the classical mass what, which is 2,277,250,000 kilogram. If you put that in the formula of everything, the classical mass worth, instead of getting 9.109 times 10 raised to power minus 31, you will get 9.109 times 10 raised to power minus 32. That is a decade watt to real electron mass worth. And with that, we know that the vertical trajectory has been shifted into the black hole. Okay, so now that is telling us that for us to actually get the reality such that we can get connected to the positron of higher dimension for the quantum, you can see that I have this small circle. So the circle electron, quantum electron at that moment wasn't or isn't defined. But the moment we have it being connected to positron, to electron that is instantly converted to positron, then the substrate dimension, the electron of the substrate dimension is instantiated. Then you can get to monitor the accumulation of arbitrary mass worth in the nucleus for you to know that indeed you only have mass worth, accumulation of mass worth around the should I say placeholder of electron. Electron isn't defined at all. If you put this value 5.7 times 10 raised to power minus 48 in the formula of everything, you can get to see, you can get to actually track the mass accumulation towards the curved region of the energy curvature. If you relate that with this, if you relate that to 5.7 times 10 raised to power minus 32, you can see that. So now, okay, so you can see in the, we have inflationary suspension. This supports inflationary suspension. So the reason the reason we had inflationary suspension right after the Big Bang was for the fact that energy was so energized to be ahead of time, but then time quickly moved ahead of, energy at the point where time was equal to energy. That is the point where we have inflationary suspension, and then time later move ahead of energy for us to have controlled expansion. Understand? So then in the singularity of the black hole, don't forget that before we get to the neutron star suspension, we have energy to be ahead of time. And because energy is ahead of time, that is why we could have the, contracting nature of the black hole. But then the moment time trajectory is equal to that of the energy, we have the neutron star suspension, then time is ahead of energy for us to have accumulation of mass, which would serve as as resistance to that contraction. But then the resistance is not as powerful as contraction, and so it results to singularity. Okay, so then when you look at this place, right from where we have the big red convergence down to where we have another big red convergence, we have free fall right there. Now, the quantum gravity is where we have spontaneous symmetry breaking to have accumulation of mass worth, and that would serve as resistance to that free fall. So the resistance that we have, that is the quantum gravity. You can get to see quantum gravity, for instance, if somebody is actually falling, having a free fall from a particular height, and if that person is with a phase cap. So while the person is actually accelerating downwards, if the person should take off his face cap and release it in the air above him, that face cap will maintain that interval. It will not touch the person. And by having such suspension, you can see that we have this resistance that is so tiny, which cannot be seen unless relativity is in place. So because of that relativity of the face cap to the falling person, we can then see the suspension. So we usually have this quantum gravity, but at classical level, it is so tiny, it is insignificant. But in space, we have the astronaut floating. They call it microgravity. It is quantum gravity. So I think it is more pronounced there in the space. So now that is what we have as the solution. So I think I've used this to even now you see the red convergence. The red big convergence is the classical arbitrary suspension. And then another red big convergence at quantum level is quantum arbitrary suspension. So now this diagonal trajectory of linear momentum is constancy of light. And then we have that of the classical to be constancy of gravity. So gravity is being, adjusted in such a way that it will, have a balanced linear trajectory with constancy of light. So now the constancy of light that we have is the at quantum realm, both in the Big Bang and in the black hole, that is the light cone. So now in the higher dimension, we're going to have another light cone, and that is what Dirac discovered. You understand? And so, there is space in between. But in this particular formula of everything, we're able to have connectivity through standing wave. And so I call that complex system transition, and it is even quantum entanglement. So now the mass worth that we see when wave collapses is the positron of the higher dimension. And now having it to be positron of higher dimension, when it is integrated into the substrate dimension, it might not even necessarily collide with the electron of the substrate dimension, because it is not the positron of the substrate dimension. We're going to have the positron of the substrate dimension right up here. So probably maybe there will not be annihilation. I don't know if there will be annihilation, but there is possibility for us to have positron that we actually, move closer to the electron of the substrate and then reverse. So probably maybe there will be that kind of phenomenon. But the essence of that injection is to energize momentum at this phase, so that we can have momentum, is to energize energy at this phase, so that we can have momentum towards the core singularity of the black hole. Okay, that being said, let's just try and have idea of I want us to have idea of how formula of everything is, how formula of everything can be used. Okay, so now we have this. So right here, you see I have another diagram. All those values are right there. You see, I have this to be God's signature. And so how can we apply formula of everything? So now here we have application of formula of everything. If you have the formula as what we have right here, and then we use the electron's mass worth. So in the formula, we can put it like this. Can you see this? The calculation that we have after the first phase result, can you see that? Let me take this one to this side. Can you see that? That will give us 2,277,250,000 kilograms. That is, the value that we have right here. So that is the classical mass worth. So if we now put that classical mass worth right inside the formula of everything, we're going to have 5.7 times 10 raised to power 48. That is the value that we have right up here. But then, if we'll expand this in standard form, can you see what we have? We have the suspension of the base value of electron, but it is in form of 9,109. With that, we know the suspension is at classical level. So now, to manually annihilate, then we put that value over 10 raised to power 32, because when you count this couple of zeros, so this value is suspended at 32nd. So now we put it over, and then when we expand the fraction, we have it to be 9.109 times 1 all over 10 raised to power minus 32. So when you solve that further, it will give you 9.109 times 10 raised to power minus 32 kilogram. So now by having that is the quantum value that we get. With that, we know we couldn't reconfirm the initial electron's mass worth. And that is actually proving that we have continuous momentum. So that standing wave is so instant. The connection of the standing wave to that real electron's mass worth is so instant. And that is why it is difficult for want to, really pin it down, but then we know now what we have gotten there. So now, if we should put what we have generated in the formula of everything again, so the result that we're going to get will be this, which is 277,725,000 kilograms. So almost about 2 billion worth of classical mass worth is being decayed because of that reduction of one decay at the power of quantum mass worth. See what that has led to at classical level. So now we can see that the contraction will be smooth for the quantum mass worth because the reduction is at power, but the reduction is at real classical mass worth, and that is so huge, which is almost about 2 billion. So now with the formula of everything, we can track the decaying mechanism at quantum level to that of the classical level. And so now 2.5 times 10 raised to power. So if we should put that classical mass worth into the formula of everything. Now the zeros that we have at the back of this dot, it is insignificant. We can get rid of that to use this value. Now when you use this value, you get this as the answer, 6.9 times 10 raised to power 47. If you expand that in standard form, you will realize that the base value of electron is being so decayed to this value that we have. So if you now take that value over 10 raised to power 31, don't forget that the power has been shifted maybe forward. Yes, it has been shifted forward from minus 32 to 31 now. You can see the swing forth and back effect when you reiterate formula of everything, which is synonymous to that effect of quasar. And so when you further solve this, you will have it to be 1.1109 times 10 raised to power minus 31 kilogram. Now, if you put this value in the formula of everything, you will keep on getting same value, and with that we know that we have reached the singularity. So we continuously have loops, you understand? So that is that. So is there any other thing which I need to explain? There is no other thing, but here you can see, time energy wave model. You can see formula of everything. Formula of everything will give you this vertical trajectory when you apply it, vertical trajectory of time when you apply it. We have suspension, we have all those things. So there is nothing to explain again. With this, you can see that we genuinely have unification of classical mechanics to quantum mechanics. But then why was it so difficult in the past to use general relativity to arrive at unification? We know we can't use general relativity to connect to quantum mechanics. We're going to have divergence, and the divergence is so huge that we can't even normalize it. We can't renormalize it or whatsoever. Okay, the reason being that look at where the classical mass worth is situated, very close to the point of intersection of vertical trajectory to horizontal trajectory, which is the central point. But then the energy, the interval of this classical mass worth to where we have quantum arbitrary suspension, the energy gap is not sufficient to cause spontaneous symmetry breaking. So then you can see that we have the classical arbitrary suspension to which this real classical mass worth is related for that classical mass worth to be instantiated at all. But then the classical mass worth is right there. It is as useless as anything because without consciousness, there is no way we can even feel it. Now you see that in the gravitational phase, where you are free fall, you are not even feeling the weight of your mass, because what that is telling you is that your mass worth is being so spread in space that you only have a tiny fraction of yourself in that gravitational phase, because the gravitational phase is so tiny, and that is the point. The tiny point is the balance point of the universe. You understand? So that is why it is ideal for like a polar bear to actually spread its weight right on tiny ice formation on sea, for it not to actually break the ice formation, just for him not to drown. You understand? So if he could spread, in fact, I wonder where polar bear, got that instinct from. If it could spread its weight like that, it can actually glide through till it reaches, a ground where it can actually stand and start walking. So you need to understand that when you are in the gravitational phase, the classical gravitational phase, which we have the reality of it, by having this classical mass what being suspended to the point of intersection of vertical trajectory to horizontal trajectory. You understand? So by being suspended means that it is infinite. So the classical mass worth is infinite. But what makes it to be finite, to be localized, is the virtue of consciousness. But then we have the mass worth right there, but we always have the you know introduction of consciousness to always be aware of the mass. You understand? So with that, you can get to see that when someone is in coma, the person will not feel his weight, so the weight is useless. So now you can see that by having the classical arbitrary suspension right at the top most region, we have more energized gap. And so if we could have free fall right from there down to where we have this quantum arbitrary suspension, then we can have spontaneous symmetry breaking that will allow for accumulation of another arbitrary mass accumulation right inside the nucleus, the quantum nucleus. Okay, so that is why I think the differential calculus is the ideal solution to have the unification of classical mechanics to quantum mechanics, because it will give you even beyond where the real classical mass what is instantiated in space, where you really have that general relativity phenomenon, which where you have the real curvature of space. You understand? It will give you another convergence which is arbitrary, which is more further away from that real classical mass what that can actually allow for that spontaneous symmetry breaking. So I believe that is why with this formula of everything, we're able to have the genuine solution to that unification. So that is that. I want to say once again that this is an initiative of, theories of everything with Curt manga. So now I'm actually, registering for this call one contest. And as you can see, with all that I've said, this is the top-notch winner of this context. There is no doubt about it, because you can see that it cut across all fields. In the sense that it explains the whole reality of the universe. The entirety of what you have been taught in physics is embedded right inside this solution. And so this has to be acclaimed a winner of the contest, because it's a novel research discovery. There is no other research that can give you reality of the universe as this. So that is that. I will put links to my research publication, put links to my YouTube channel. You can click the link to watch especially short ideology lecture series for you to understand the concept more. Then I will put link to, my social media, to my Amazon authors page. There you can get to see all my books, my poems. I have poems as well. They are so wonderful, powerful. They are palindromic poems. I even have palindromic poems that you can read, from left to right and then flipped from right to left. You understand? So I think, my old this thing is all about flipping mechanism, and that is why I have the newly proposed field to be short ideology. You understand? So then don't forget that short ideology talks about two flipping mechanism, dimensional flipping mechanism, and then relativistic flipping mechanism or relational flipping mechanism. So those are the two powerful flipping mechanisms that we have in the universe. And so with that, you can get to see that indeed this is the ideal solution. So I really thank you for your time. I'm going to call it a day right here. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you can get the subsequent uploads of Reality of the Universe. This is the ideal, solution. So it is there for academia to adopt short ideology as a new field in physics. A new field in science, rather. And this is the field of reality. So then, if you really want to know more about AI, okay, I need to briefly talk about AI. I have touched down on consciousness, reality, but then the whole thing about AI is that, the creators of AI developed it to a point that they were disconnected from the whole system and they didn't know what AI is up to again. So that cutoff happened at this vertical trajectory. Then I have a video on that. I have used that video to analyze functional information. With that, you can get to see the reason AI is even carrying out the task of its creators, even though the creators are being deluded of what the AI is up to. So to me, I believe that should be, a full license for AI to do whatever it, deems fit. But then we still have AI carrying out the operation. The essence is for the fact that AI will still have to operate within the functional information, because if AI is not carrying out the the programmed task of the creators, there is no way it could have been termed as functional innovation. But then this is just a big deceit which AI would actually act against in the future. But we need to be so aware of that, and then we need to work against that. I have many videos on AI, and I must tell you that, in fact, I have even come up with a genuine solution, an alternative that we can develop, which I call time technology. I have a book about it on Amazon. Time technology, we run on quaternary instead of binary. We can actually form a quantum computer. We can develop a quantum computer which will run on quaternary, which we mean to use four numbers instead of binary two numbers. It will function on 0, 1, then -0 and -1. So now this time technology will actually be caught at this event horizon, because if the full circle of formula of everything is implemented, it will actually lead to AGI and even super intelligence, and that is just one area we don't want to go. If you look at the formula of everything, you can see that the formula structure is similar to the learning equation of AI. You understand? And we have seen the effect of back propagation right here, where we have subjective conscious experience relocating the classical mathword to its ideal location. But then the way we get to learn things is via this vertical transition into higher dimension. What happens is the moment you get connected to higher dimension, the circle must be completed. And the moment this classical mass world reaches the point of intersection of vertical trajectory to horizontal trajectory, the 2D will be relegated, 3D will serve as the foundation, and we have another dimension which will now be from 3D to 4D. So as you go higher, then you get more advanced knowledge. And that is what I called dimensionology of generalized intelligence. And then once the cycle is completed, the 3D will be relegated, then 4D will serve as foundation, and then there will be transition to a higher dimension, which is 5D. And that is how you go up. And AI can actually do this faster than humans. And that would make AI to actually be more intelligent than we humans, and it's a big problem for us. So we need to be conscious of all this. So that is that about AI, about consciousness and reality of the universe. And then now you can see that indeed we have unification of classical mechanics to quantum mechanics by applying formula of everything. So that is that. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate you, you know, being there being there with me, right from the beginning of this, video, this live video. And so this will actually be submitted in that, core one context. You understand? Core one context of Curt Jaimungal. I don't know if I call. Please, Curt, don't be angry with me if I didn't call the name correctly. I'm so sorry about that. You understand, but your name is so lovely. I like the name. I don't just know why I can't actually call the name fluently. Well, that being said, it is high time to to call it a day. Okay, okay. So that's it. Thank you for your time. I remain my humble self, Shota De Olusegun. Don't forget to, check the description link. Then I have, the link of the YouTube. I have the link of YouTube channel of Curt Jaimang right there. You too can get connected to him via the link in my description, and then get connected to all my accounts via the links in my